The Carter estate had never looked so breathtaking. Golden chandeliers hung like shimmering stars from the high, vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, enchanting glow over the gathering of the city's most elite. Lush arrangements of white roses, peonies, and delicate orchids adorned every corner, their fragrance mingling with the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume. The grand hall buzzed with excitement, everyone dressed in designer suits and glittering gowns, eager to witness what promised to be the wedding of the year. Lucas Carter, a man who seemed to have everything, wealth, youth, and piercing blue eyes that could steal any heart, stood tall at the altar. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, every dark strand of his hair neatly in place. Yet beneath his composed exterior, his heart pounded anxiously. He wasn't nervous about the ceremony itself, but about the life he was about to step into. Madeline Blake was beautiful, powerful, and the envy of every woman in the room. Everyone said they were the perfect match. But perfection, Lucas was beginning to realize, could be a clever disguise. Madeline was late. The clock ticked, the string quartet played softly, and the murmurs of the guests grew. Lucas forced a smile, reassuring his mother seated in the front row. Deep down, unease clawed at him. And then, the heavy double doors finally opened. Madeline entered, a vision in her designer gown, diamonds sparkling against her porcelain skin. She looked like a goddess, but her eyes were cold, sharp like shards of glass. Lucas's breath caught. Something was wrong. She didn't take her place beside him. Instead, she turned to the crowd, her face a mask of icy determination. A chilling silence fell over the room. "I can't do this," Madeline announced, her voice crisp and emotionless. "I won't marry a man whose family is one financial disaster away from ruin." The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted. Whispered shockwaves spread through the sea of stunned faces. Lucas's world tilted on its axis. His hands trembled at his sides. He stared at her, disbelief tightening his throat. "Madeline, what are you saying?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Your father's company is crumbling, Lucas, and I refuse to tie my future to a sinking ship. I deserve better than a man clinging to the last scraps of his fortune." The sting of humiliation burned his skin, each word cutting deeper than the last. Lucas felt the weight of every stare, every unspoken judgment. The perfect image he'd built shattered in an instant, leaving behind a man stripped bare before the vultures. In the back of the room, hidden behind a curtain of flowers, Aubrey Collins watched it unfold. The florist had been working tirelessly since dawn, arranging blooms for a love story she thought was meant to last. But now, watching Lucas, his heartbreak so raw, his blue eyes clouded with pain, something in her own chest twisted. It wasn't pity she felt, but a deep, aching empathy. Aubrey had always believed in kindness, in the goodness of people beyond their wealth and titles. And here, in this cruel display, she saw the truth. Lucas wasn't just a name on the society pages or the heir to a fortune. He was a man broken in front of a crowd too hungry for scandal to care. The silence in the hall stretched unbearably until Madeline, with a satisfied flick of her perfectly styled hair, turned and left, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. The guests, unsure whether to stay or flee, murmured in awkward confusion. Lucas remained frozen, his heart pounding in the hollow emptiness Madeline had left behind. His mother's sobs were a distant echo in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape the suffocating humiliation. And yet, through the blur of faces and flashing cameras, his eyes locked with Aubrey's. Just for a moment, a quiet, fragile connection sparked in that glance. Her expression wasn't one of curiosity or cruel delight like the others, but one of understanding, a stranger, yet somehow the only real thing in the room. Lucas broke the gaze, shoving past the crowd as the pressure threatened to drown him. He needed air. He needed to be away from this twisted performance of wealth and loyalty. Aubrey remained behind, her fingers brushing the petals of a white rose, heart aching for a man she didn't know, but felt strangely, deeply connected to. In that brief, unspoken moment, their fates had quietly, irrevocably begun to intertwine. Little did either of them know, This was the moment their worlds collided, and nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The echo of Madeline's cruel words still rang in Lucas Carter's ears as he stumbled away from the suffocating crowd. Every pair of eyes had felt like a dagger, and every whisper a confirmation of his failure. He could barely breathe. The weight of humiliation clung to him like a heavy cloak, choking every thought. He pushed open the tall glass doors leading out to the garden behind the estate. The air was cooler there, the night sky stretching endlessly overhead, dotted with stars that didn't care about scandals or fortunes lost. The scent of fresh roses and gardenias drifted through the air, a soft contrast to the sharp perfume of betrayal that still lingered inside. Lucas made his way to a stone bench by the fountain, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. He sat down heavily, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His once bright, confident blue eyes were now clouded, hollow, distant, as if staring into a void only he could see. The reflection in the fountain rippled, distorting the image of a man who moments ago had everything, and now had nothing. He didn't notice the soft footsteps approaching. Aubrey Collins had seen enough. Though she was just the florist, hired for her hands, not her presence, her heart ached for the stranger she had only known through secondhand stories and magazine covers. The Lucas Carter she'd heard about was a polished, untouchable millionaire. But the man sitting in the shadows tonight was just human, broken, raw, and so deeply alone. In her hands, she clutched a small bouquet she hadn't planned on making. Simple wildflowers, lavender, white daisies, and a single ivory rose. No grand arrangement, no silk ribbons or extravagant designs, just honest, quiet beauty. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Who was she to intrude? A florist, not a friend. But some silent part of her moved her forward. She stepped closer. "Hey!" Her voice was soft, hesitant, carrying no trace of pity. Lucas looked up, startled. For a second, he seemed to brace himself. For more mockery, another judgment, some thinly veiled sympathy. But when his eyes met hers, something shifted. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't pretending not to stare. She wasn't wearing a mask of polite horror. Aubrey smiled gently and extended the little bouquet. "I made these. I thought you might need them more than the tables do." He stared at the flowers, then at her face. There was no pity in her gaze, no questions, no interest in the scandal, just kindness, pure and untainted. "I don't need flowers," Lucas said quietly, his voice rough and thick. "I know," Aubrey replied, sitting down beside him without asking permission. "But sometimes it's not about needing them." There was a pause, heavy but not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Lucas's throat tightened. For the first time since Madeline's cruel announcement, he didn't feel like a headline or a failure. He felt seen. Not as Lucas Carter, heir to an empire, but just Lucas. "Why are you here?" he asked, not out of suspicion, but genuine curiosity. "I'm the florist," she smiled lightly, tucking a stray strand of silky blonde hair behind her ear. "Well, I was, until your bride-to-be turned it into a single-man show." That made him almost smile. Almost. "I'm sorry you worked so hard for this." He gestured vaguely towards the empty estate. "I don't mind," she shrugged. "I don't decorate for people like Madeline Blake. I decorate for the moments people remember." He glanced at the bouquet again. There was something simple, beautiful, and heartbreakingly honest about it. In a world of diamond-studded lies, this small gesture felt more real than anything else tonight. "I'm Lucas," he said, though he knew she already knew. "Aubrey," she replied softly. For a moment, they just sat there. No cameras, no expectations. Just two strangers in a quiet garden, beneath a sky that had silently watched everything fall apart. In the cool stillness, an invisible thread wove between them. Delicate, fragile, but undeniably there. Neither of them could see where it might lead. But in that unspoken connection, something had quietly begun. Something neither wealth nor status could fake. Aubrey didn't see a fallen millionaire, and Lucas didn't see a florist. They simply saw each other. The days after the disastrous wedding felt like a blur for Lucas Carter. Headlines blared his humiliation, tabloids feasted on his downfall, and even the people who once worshipped his name now spoke of him in hushed, mocking tones. The mansion felt empty. Every room echoed memories of his old life, a life now crumbling. He longed for peace, for a place untouched by scandal, untouched by expectation. That was when he decided to disappear for a while, slipping away from the watchful eyes of the world. No entourage, no expensive cars, just a plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, and sunglasses. A disguise for a man who barely recognized himself. Wandering the streets of a quiet neighborhood far from his estate, Lucas noticed a quaint little flower shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. Its sign, painted in soft cursive letters, read, "Petals and Grace." There was something unassuming and gentle about it, something that called to a part of him long buried. On impulse, he stepped inside. The soft chime of the bell overhead stirred a gentle fragrance of lavender, peonies, and wild roses. The place was small but filled with warmth. Pale wooden shelves lined with vases, sun-drenched windows, and fresh blooms everywhere. For the first time in days, Lucas felt his chest loosen. And then he saw her, Aubrey Collins. She stood behind the counter, carefully arranging a bunch of pale blue hydrangeas. The late afternoon sunlight caught the honey strands in her hair, making her look like something painted in an old forgotten storybook. Lucas froze. His pulse quickened, a strange warmth creeping up his throat. Aubrey looked up, surprised. For a moment, neither spoke. The memory of the garden, the broken wedding night, and that quiet connection hanging between them like a fragile thread. "Well, this is unexpected," Aubrey said, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of her lips. Lucas took a step closer, his usual confidence replaced by something far more genuine, far more unpolished. "Yeah, I didn't know you worked here." "I do," she said softly, setting the flowers aside. "It's my little world, away from everything." He glanced around, taking in the calm, unpretentious beauty of the shop. "It's nice. Peaceful." Aubrey nodded. "Sometimes life needs a little peace." They stood in silence for a heartbeat, not awkward, but almost comforting. "Listen," Lucas started, unsure why he suddenly felt the need to explain. "I wasn't I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not," Aubrey assured him. "People find this place when they need to. Maybe you needed it." That simple, thoughtful reply disarmed him more than she could have known. Lucas found himself lingering. He asked about the flowers, about how long she'd worked there, about what it was like creating beauty in such a simple way. Aubrey, in turn, told him about the calming effect of tending to things that bloom, how life was easier to understand when it was petals and seasons, rather than broken vows and billion-dollar empires. They spoke about things neither had spoken of to anyone else, about loss, about loneliness, about how small joys, like a sunrise or a perfect lavender bloom, could mean more than diamonds. Lucas began visiting the shop often. At first, it was under the excuse of needing flowers for the house. Then it became coffee, and then conversations. Every visit felt like pulling another thread loose from the tightly wound knot inside him. Aubrey's presence was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, quiet, steady, and unexpected. What neither of them realized was how those simple visits were becoming the foundation of something deeper. Lucas started looking forward to those moments, the soft chime of the door, the warmth in her smile, the way she spoke without pretending. In a world where everything was loud, dramatic, and superficial, Aubrey was real, and unknowingly, she was mending parts of him he thought were forever broken. For Aubrey, there was a quiet thrill in seeing Lucas walk in. His blue eyes, once clouded and cold, had started to show sparks of life. She saw the man beneath the name, vulnerable, funny, flawed, and kind. And though she would never admit it, her heart began to flutter in ways she'd long forgotten. Neither confessed what was growing between them. Not yet, but the air was changing, thick with unspoken words, lingering glances, and a warmth neither of them could name. And fate, as it often does, was far from done with them. The days were a blur of soft sunlight and early morning conversations, a welcome escape from the chaos Lucas had once embraced. Aubrey's presence was like a balm to his soul, a quiet, steady pulse that pulled him away from the noise of wealth and status. But he couldn't ignore the truth. Her world was far from his own. She was a florist, a woman who grew her life in the soil, not the boardrooms and penthouses where Lucas had spent his entire existence. One day, as the gentle spring breeze swirled through the open windows of the flower shop, Lucas made a decision. He knew he wanted more time with her, and more importantly, he wanted her near. "Aubrey," he said, leaning against the counter. His voice held an unusual seriousness, one that wasn't lost on her. She looked up, her bright eyes meeting his, expecting the usual light-hearted banter that had become a part of their routine. But there was something different in his gaze now, something deeper. "I'd like to offer you a job," he began, his words deliberate, as though each one weighed heavily on his chest. "I need someone to tend to the gardens at my estate. It's been a mess, and frankly, I'm not great with plants." He chuckled, though the sound felt foreign. "You're good with them, and I'd like you to do it." Aubrey blinked in surprise. It wasn't the job itself that caught her off guard. She'd worked with gardens before. But the offer itself, coming from Lucas Carter, the man who had everything, and yet had shown her nothing but quiet moments of sincerity and humility. But doubt crept in. She wasn't naive. She had seen the world Lucas came from, the wealth, the power, the harsh judgments that people like him often passed down on those they deemed beneath them. The elite world that had once rejected him, the world she had no desire to be part of, felt like a storm on the horizon. "Lucas, I don't know. Your world is—" Her voice trailed off, unsure how to explain the unease bubbling inside her. "I don't belong there." He stepped closer, a determined look in his eyes. "You belong with me. And this isn't about that world. It's just a garden, Aubrey. Just plants and space. I want you here, in this world, my world, with no judgment, no expectations, just peace." There was sincerity in his voice, and for a moment she almost believed him. But the weight of her past, the scars from the world she had fought to escape, made it hard to believe in such simplicity. "I'll think about it," she finally said, though deep down she knew the answer was already forming. Days turned into weeks. Aubrey began working at Lucas's estate, tending to the sprawling gardens that had once been neglected in the shadows of the mansion. The work was peaceful, therapeutic. Every morning she arrived with a quiet calm that settled over Lucas like a blanket, something he hadn't realized he needed so desperately. But with her presence in his life came another kind of storm. His elite friends, the businessmen, the socialites, and even some of his closest allies began to take notice of her. They didn't say it outright, but their stares spoke volumes. The whispers followed her everywhere she went. "Who is she?" one of Lucas's childhood friends asked, his voice low, yet tinged with disapproval. "A gardener? A florist? What's she doing in your garden? It's not fitting, Lucas. You've got to draw the line somewhere." Lucas bristled, though he said nothing. He hadn't expected everyone to embrace Aubrey the way he did, but he hadn't realized just how deep the divide between his world and hers was. To them, she was a nobody, an outsider. But to him, she was the only person who had ever seen him for who he really was. As the days passed, Aubrey started to notice the cold glances, the snide remarks, the subtle rejection woven into every conversation with Lucas's circle. It hurt, but she never let it show. She was used to it. She had always been used to it. But then came the hardest blow of all. Madeline Blake. Madeline hadn't disappeared from Lucas's life entirely. She still moved in the same circles, her name still carrying weight in the gossip columns, and she had made it her mission to remind Lucas of the life he had lost. Bitter over his recovery and the attention he had started giving to a nobody like Aubrey, Madeline plotted her revenge. One evening, as Lucas and Aubrey sat on the veranda, sipping wine and discussing nothing but the simple pleasures of life, a car pulled up outside. It was sleek, black, and far too polished to be anything other than an ambassador of wealth. Out stepped Madeline, her heels clicking against the stone driveway, a smile that seemed too sweet to be sincere, curling at the corners of her lips. "Lucas," she greeted him with false sweetness. "I see you're doing quite well for yourself, and it's good to know you're back on your feet. But I do wonder if you've made the right choices in your recovery." Madeline's eyes shifted to Aubrey, and the subtle insult in her gaze wasn't lost on either of them. "I think it's time you face reality, Lucas," Madeline continued, her voice cold and sharp. "Not everyone in your life should be living in your garden." Lucas felt the tension rise, but before he could respond, Aubrey stood up. The sting of Madeline's words had already cut deep, but she refused to show it. She was strong, strong enough not to let Madeline's venom touch her. "I think I'll go back inside," Aubrey said, her tone polite but firm. She had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, but as she turned to walk away, Madeline's voice followed her like a shadow. "Don't get too comfortable. People like you don't belong here. This is a world of power, not roses." The words stung, more than Aubrey would ever admit. Lucas stood frozen for a moment, the words hanging heavily in the air. Madeline had always been a part of his life, but now for the first time, he saw her for what she truly was. Someone who thrived on power, on control, and on tearing others down. He turned to Aubrey, his heart racing. The storm inside him was building. The choice between the world he once knew and the world he was beginning to value more than anything. Madeline's words echoed in his mind, but so did Aubrey's calm presence, her kindness, her strength. He had a choice to make. The glittering lights of the charity gala cast a glow over the grand ballroom, where guests sipped champagne and mingled in elegant gowns and tuxedos. It was the kind of event where every detail was flawless, where every conversation was carefully curated. Lucas Carter, looking every bit the part of the handsome millionaire, walked through the crowd with an air of quiet confidence. But his mind wasn't fully here. Not tonight. His thoughts kept drifting back to the quiet, unassuming woman he had come to admire, Aubrey Collins. Though Lucas had been invited by some of his business associates, he felt out of place in this sea of opulence. He had been going through the motions, smiling when expected, laughing when it was called for. But in the back of his mind, all he could think about was the simple yet powerful presence of Aubrey, who had once again entered his life and changed it in ways he hadn't thought possible. It didn't take long for him to realize that tonight would be different. Across the room, a familiar figure caught his eye. It was Madeline. Her eyes locked on him, and her lips curled into a smirk as she moved toward him. She was stunning in her black velvet gown, every inch the woman Lucas had once been captivated by. But tonight, her beauty seemed hollow compared to the warmth he felt when he thought of Aubrey. Madeline's gaze shifted, and Lucas followed her eyes to where Aubrey stood, innocently chatting with a group of guests. Madeline wasted no time. She strode over to Aubrey, the tension between the two women thick in the air. Lucas watched, a knot forming in his stomach. Madeline was still carrying the bitterness from the wedding day, and he could sense trouble brewing. "Isn't this cute?" Madeline's voice rang out, sharp and calculated. "A humble little florist attending a charity gala. Tell me, do you even know how to blend into this world? Or are you just here for the free food?" Aubrey looked up at Madeline, her gaze calm but her heart racing. She had been through worse, but being publicly taunted by someone so cruel was a challenge she had yet to face. Still, her response was measured, her words deliberate. "I don't need to blend in, Madeline," Aubrey said, her voice steady. "I've never been one to seek approval from people who don't understand kindness." The words hung in the air, like a defiant challenge that Madeline couldn't ignore. The crowd, having gathered around them, fell silent. Aubrey wasn't crumbling, wasn't backing down. Instead, she stood tall, with a quiet grace that made the onlookers take notice. Madeline's smile faltered for a moment, her icy exterior cracking ever so slightly. "How quaint," she sneered. "But I'm afraid being kind won't get you very far in a world like this. It's about power, control, and status. Something you'll never have." Aubrey's expression softened, as though pitying Madeline's obsession with power. "If that's the world you need to live in, then I'm sorry for you," she replied quietly. "But I don't need anything but respect and honesty." The guests around them were utterly silent, unsure whether they should intervene or simply watch the tension unfold. But Lucas, watching from across the room, couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for the woman who stood before Madeline, unshaken. The depth of her humility, her poise in the face of such ridicule, left him breathless. Madeline's laughter was hollow, her eyes flickering with something darker. "You really think you belong here?" she hissed. "You're just a simple girl from nowhere. This," she gestured to the grand surroundings, "this is for people like me, not you." Aubrey's smile didn't falter. She took a deep breath, her next words delivered with such sincerity that they cut through the air like a dagger. "No," she said softly. "This is for people who've forgotten what it means to care about others, the ones who have everything but still want more." Her voice was unwavering. "I don't need your world. I already have everything I need." With that, Aubrey turned away from Madeline and the crowd, leaving them in stunned silence. She didn't need to fight fire with fire. Her silence was the most powerful answer she could give. Lucas, watching from the distance, felt a profound shift inside him. His heart swelled with something he hadn't expected to feel so intensely: admiration, respect, and something more. Something deeper, something more dangerous. He didn't just admire Aubrey, he cared for her. And in that moment, as he watched her gracefully leave the crowd and walk toward the door, he realized that he was falling for her, in a way that went far beyond the superficialities of his past life. That night, as the gala continued without him, Lucas couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts tangled in the beauty of the evening. She wasn't like the others. She didn't care about his wealth, his status, or the life he had once lived. She cared about him, the real him. The realization hit him like a wave. He had been so caught up in the world of wealth and power that he hadn't even realized how lonely it had made him. Aubrey, in her simplicity and grace, had shown him a love that didn't require anything other than honesty and respect. And that love, Lucas knew, was something he hadn't even dared to hope for. The days that followed the gala were clouded with a growing sense of unease for Lucas. He had always prided himself on being able to read people, to assess their intentions with a sharp eye. But Aubrey was different. She had a quiet strength, an unassuming beauty that drew him in. And yet he couldn't help but fear the possibility that she was too good to be true. He had been burned before, and the sting of betrayal was still fresh. He was terrified of repeating that pain, of losing himself in someone who might only want him for his wealth. And so the testing began. At first it was subtle. Lucas, pretending to be casual, invited Aubrey to dinner at one of the finest restaurants in town. When they sat down, he watched her closely as the waiter presented the menu, full of expensive delicacies and extravagant wines. He ordered for them both, and as the evening unfolded, he kept his eye on her reactions, on every word, every glance. Would she be impressed by the luxury? Would she show a hint of excitement at the lavish setting? Would she subtly try to steer the conversation toward his fortune? But as the night wore on, Lucas couldn't help but notice how she was perfectly at ease. She didn't look uncomfortable or out of place, but she also didn't seem overly enamored by the extravagance. She listened to him talk about his business, about his life, but never once did she steer the conversation toward his wealth. Instead, she shared stories about her childhood, about how she found joy in the simplest moments, like a walk in the park or the smell of fresh flowers in the air. Aubrey's eyes were soft, warm, and utterly genuine, and there was something about the way she spoke that left him both unsettled and fascinated. By the end of the night, Aubrey gently declined the expensive bottle of wine he suggested they take home, instead opting for a cup of coffee from a small cafe down the street. She had no interest in the glamour he had come to associate with success. To her, it was the conversation, the moments shared, that mattered. Still, Lucas couldn't shake his doubts. He wasn't sure if he should feel relieved or alarmed. She had rejected the opulence, but did that mean she wasn't using him in a different way? Was she simply playing the role of the humble, modest woman who didn't care for material things, while secretly eyeing his fortune? The next test came soon after, in the form of a beautifully wrapped gift. Lucas had heard from a colleague about Aubrey's love for painting and art, so he decided to buy her a one-of-a-kind piece from an exclusive gallery. The painting was breathtaking, a masterpiece that he knew would have cost a small fortune. When he handed it to her, He watched her eyes closely, waiting for that gleam of admiration, the surprise at receiving such an extravagant gift. But instead, she seemed almost taken aback. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the delicate wrapping paper before she spoke. "Lucas, it's beautiful," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. "But I don't need this. I don't need anything expensive. I have everything I need in the people around me." For a moment the words stung. He had chosen the gift so carefully, hoping it would draw out some reaction that would justify his fears. But instead, she had rejected it, turning the moment into something far more personal, far more meaningful than he had anticipated. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice faltering slightly. "Absolutely," she replied with a smile, one that warmed him more than the most lavish gift ever could. "Your friendship, your time, that's all I need." And with that, the seed of doubt only grew in his mind. Was she rejecting the luxury because she genuinely didn't care for it? Or was she playing a long game, pretending to be uninterested in his wealth while secretly plotting to claim it? The struggle inside him became all-consuming. The man who had built his empire from the ground up was now a slave to his own fear, unable to fully trust the woman who had captured his heart. Every time she spoke, every time she smiled, he questioned her motives. It wasn't because he didn't believe in her, but because he had been betrayed before. The wound was still fresh, and he couldn't bring himself to risk everything again. As if the internal battle weren't enough, Lucas was now facing another threat, one that came from the very person he had hoped to leave behind. Madeline. Desperate and seething with jealousy, she began to work behind the scenes, planting seeds of doubt about Aubrey in Lucas's mind. She sent him anonymous texts, subtle accusations about how Aubrey might be using him for his money. She would send pictures of Aubrey laughing with other men, insinuating that she was unfaithful or only interested in his wealth. Madeline knew how to play the game. She knew how to manipulate, how to twist the truth to fit her narrative. But as much as she tried, Lucas's heart wasn't easily swayed. He began to notice the patterns in Madeline's messages, the way she used subtle, insidious language to manipulate him. He saw through her lies, and yet the fear of betrayal lingered like a shadow over his heart. Despite the confusion, despite the doubts, Lucas knew one thing for certain. Aubrey was not like the women he had known. She wasn't like Madeline. But was it enough? Was he ready to take the risk? In the stillness of the night, Lucas stared at his phone, conflicted. The text from Madeline blurred in his mind, and all he wanted was clarity. All he wanted was to trust Aubrey, to let go of the fear that had held him captive for so long. But every time he took a step forward, his heart pulled him back, scared of what might happen if he was wrong. The storm inside him grew with each passing day, and the longer it raged, the more he feared that his own doubts might be the very thing to destroy the love he had found with Aubrey. The days following the charity gala had been tense between Lucas and Aubrey. Her warmth, her gentle presence, had once been a balm to his wounded soul. But lately something had changed. Lucas couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt a chill between them, a distance that wasn't there before. It wasn't that she had pulled away, not exactly, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a subtle shift in the way she spoke, in the way she smiled. It was as if she was holding something back, something important that she couldn't bring herself to say. Lucas noticed it, but couldn't bring himself to ask. He was still tangled in his own fears, in the doubts that had been planted in his mind. His insecurities, his need for control, were now making him act cold and distant, a far cry from the man who had once found solace in her arms. One evening, after a long day of work, Lucas returned to his estate to find a small envelope waiting for him on his desk. It was simple, with no name, just a delicate piece of stationery that he immediately recognized as Aubrey's handwriting. His heart skipped a beat as he picked it up, a strange feeling of dread creeping over him. Opening the letter, Lucas read the words, each one more painful than the last. Lucas, I've been thinking a lot lately, and I know that things have changed between us. I can feel the distance growing, and I can't ignore it any longer. I don't know what has happened or why things have shifted, but I can sense that I'm no longer the woman you turn to for comfort, for solace. I understand the world we come from, the lives we lead, they aren't the same. You belong to a world of luxury, power, and expectations. And I belong to a simpler life, one that doesn't fit in with all the noise surrounding you. I want you to know that my feelings for you were never about your name, your money, or your status. I fell for you, Lucas, for the man who was kind, who cared about people, who saw the beauty in the little things. You taught me that love doesn't need to be grand or extravagant to be real. It's the quiet moments, the shared laughter, the understanding without words. I fell in love with the man you are, not the man you could be. But I know that my place in your life is causing you more pain than joy. I don't want to be the reason you're torn between your heart and the life you've built. I've made the decision to leave town. I think it's best for both of us. You deserve peace, Lucas. You deserve to find happiness without the confusion I've brought into your life. Please don't try to find me. This is what's best for both of us. Goodbye, Aubrey. Lucas stood frozen, the letter slipping from his fingers as his mind raced. His heart clenched with a visceral pain that he hadn't felt in years. It was as if the world around him had collapsed in a single instant. Aubrey was leaving. She was leaving because of him, because of his doubts, his fears, and his inability to trust her fully. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been blind. He had let his insecurities and the poison planted by Madeline cloud his judgment. Aubrey had never asked for anything from him except his love, and yet he had pushed her away. He had tested her, doubted her, and now he was losing her because of it. Panic surged through him. He couldn't let her go. Not like this. Not when he knew, deep down, that she was the one person who had truly made him feel alive again. She was the one who saw him, not as a millionaire, not as a symbol of wealth and power, but as a man with flaws, with struggles, with a heart that longed for love. Without thinking, Lucas grabbed his coat, his keys, and bolted out the door. The night air hit him like a slap, but he didn't care. He couldn't waste another second. He had to find her. He had to make things right. His mind raced as he drove through the streets, the headlights of his car cutting through the darkness. Where would she go? Where could she be? He thought back to their conversations, to the places she had mentioned. The little cafe by the river, the quiet park where she loved to walk. It wasn't much, but it was something. His heart pounded as he pulled up to the small park, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance. It was deserted, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, and there, sitting on the bench beneath the fading light of a lamppost, was Aubrey. Her face was turned down, her hands folded in her lap, but Lucas could see the quiet pain in her posture. She was waiting for something. For him, perhaps. Or maybe she had already given up on him. Aubrey, he called softly, his voice breaking as he took a step toward her. She looked up, her eyes red from crying, but she didn't move. Lucas, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the night. The sight of her, broken, vulnerable, and yet so strong, shattered him. This was the woman he had been foolishly pushing away, the one who had never once asked for anything but his love. He had hurt her in ways he couldn't take back, and now he feared he had lost her forever. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands shaking as he reached out to take hers. Aubrey, please. I'm so sorry. I was stupid. I was scared, and I let my fears control me. But I know now. I know that I can't live without you. Please don't leave. I love you. I love you more than anything. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hands, her voice trembling. Lucas, you don't understand. I can't be the cause of your pain. You deserve someone who fits into your world, someone who won't make you feel torn. No, he said, shaking his head desperately. You fit into my world. You always have. You're the one who makes me feel whole. Please, Aubrey, don't leave me. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the world around them fading into the background. And then with a soft sigh, Aubrey finally spoke. I was never leaving because I didn't love you. I was leaving because I thought you didn't need me. But now, I see. You need me just as much as I need you." Lucas's heart swelled with relief, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, never wanting to let go again. The night air seemed warmer now, the darkness no longer suffocating, but a promise of something new, something real. The early morning light was still soft, casting a golden hue over the world as Lucas raced through the streets. His mind was a whirlwind, thoughts tumbling over each other as his hands gripped the steering wheel with desperation. He couldn't lose her. He couldn't let Aubrey slip through his fingers again. The bus station loomed ahead, the place that had once been a symbol of departure, now the scene of his final chance to make things right. He knew she'd be there. She had to be. Aubrey, the woman who had shown him the meaning of love, the one who had broken his heart and healed it in the same breath, was about to leave. Lucas parked his car in a rush, throwing the door open before the engine had even cut off. His breath was shallow as he scanned the platform, his heart beating wildly in his chest. Then, through the crowd of early morning travelers, he saw her. Aubrey stood by the bus, her back straight, her shoulders slightly hunched in that way she had when she was carrying a burden too heavy for her small frame. Her suitcase was at her feet, a simple, unassuming bag that seemed so out of place for someone as radiant as her. She didn't look back when he approached. She couldn't, not yet. "Aubrey!" Lucas's voice cracked as he called her name. His footsteps echoed against the concrete, growing louder as he neared. She turned slowly, her eyes already glistening with unshed tears, as if she had been waiting for him all along. Her face was a mixture of disbelief and resignation, the pain of their parting still fresh in her eyes. But there was something else there too, something fragile, a glimmer of hope that he hadn't seen in her since that fateful night at the garden. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I came," Lucas confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. His hands shook as he reached out to take hers. "Aubrey, I was so wrong. I doubted you. I doubted us. I let my fear take over, and in doing so, I almost lost the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Aubrey's lips trembled as she struggled to hold back the tears. She had tried so hard to let go, to believe that maybe she wasn't meant to have the kind of love she had always dreamed of. But here he was, standing in front of her, a man she thought she'd lost forever. "I never wanted anything from you, Lucas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I only wanted to be with you, the real you. But I can't keep fighting for something that isn't real. If you don't love me, if I'm just a distraction, I have to go." Lucas's chest tightened. The thought of her leaving again, of her walking away with that quiet sorrow in her heart, shattered him. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands still clutching hers, his eyes desperate and full of raw emotion. "Aubrey, I love you. I love you more than anything in this world. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I don't care about my father's money, about the life I've been expected to lead. You are the only thing that matters. You've always been the only thing that matters." Aubrey gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the tears began to fall, unbidden. But, but what about your family? Your friends? Your status?" she asked, her voice thick with uncertainty. "What will they say?" "I don't care," Lucas said, his voice unwavering. He stood up, pulling her into his arms, holding her close as if she were the only thing that could make him whole. "I've spent too much of my life trying to live up to expectations that weren't mine. I've let people manipulate me, and I've hurt the only woman who's ever loved me for who I really am. If they can't accept us, then they don't matter. You matter. You and me, Aubrey. That's what's real." Aubrey sobbed into his chest, her body shaking with the release of all the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. She had feared he might never see her for who she truly was, that her love would never be enough. But here he was, confessing everything she had always hoped for, and more. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, a familiar, unwelcome voice cut through the moment. "Well, well, well," Madeline's voice dripped with disdain as she emerged from the shadows, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. "So this is how it ends, Lucas? With you throwing everything away for her?" Madeline's gaze flicked over Aubrey, her eyes narrowing with venom. She's nothing but a florist. What does she have that I don't? A pretty face and a soft heart? Please, you're making a huge mistake. Lucas turned to face Madeline, his eyes cold as ice. The woman he had once thought he loved. The woman who had humiliated him, who had cared only for his wealth and status, now stood before him, a symbol of everything he no longer wanted in his life. "You're wrong, Madeline," Lucas said, his voice steady but firm. "I made my mistake when I let you into my life. You never cared about me, only about what I could give you. Aubrey doesn't need my money or my name. She loves me for who I am. That's something you'll never understand." Madeline's face twisted with rage, but Lucas didn't flinch. "I'm done with you," he added, his words like a final nail in the coffin. "I'm done pretending. Aubrey is the woman I love, and that's all that matters." With those final words, Lucas turned back to Aubrey, his hand gently cupping her face as he wiped away her tears. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Aubrey looked up at him, her heart swelling with love and disbelief. "I'm ready," she whispered. Together they walked away from the past, leaving the world that had tried to tear them apart behind. And for the first time in his life, Lucas felt truly free. Free to love, free to choose, free to be himself. As the bus left, carrying the remnants of his old life, Lucas and Aubrey stood hand in hand, ready to face the future together, no matter what it held. The days following Lucas's declaration were a whirlwind of change. They moved away from the lavish, gold-coated life Lucas had once known, and into a world that was simple, yet deeply fulfilling. The high society parties, the endless banter of the wealthy, and the constant pressure to be someone Lucas no longer wanted to be, all of it became a distant memory. In its place, there was something more precious, something real, something Lucas hadn't even known he was missing until he met Aubrey. The grand estate, once a symbol of Lucas's status and wealth, was transformed. What had once been a sterile mansion filled with expensive furniture and empty rooms was now a warm, welcoming sanctuary. Aubrey had always believed in the power of giving, and now, side by side with Lucas, she was turning that belief into something tangible. The mansion was no longer just a home. It became a haven for children and women who had nowhere else to go. Together, they created a shelter for those who needed it most, for those who had been forgotten, just like Lucas had been by Madeline. Every day, Lucas watched Aubrey pour her heart into the work. Her kindness, her compassion were contagious, and slowly, the place began to feel alive. It wasn't just the laughter of children that filled the hallways, or the warm meals prepared for the women. It was the love that radiated from every corner of the estate, a love that Aubrey and Lucas shared, and that they were spreading with every act of kindness. Aubrey had never imagined herself in a position like this. Not with Lucas, not in a life so full of purpose and meaning. She had always been content with the simplicity of her flower shop, the quiet joys of arranging flowers, and the quiet peace that came with knowing her work brought happiness to others. But now beside Lucas, she was doing so much more. She wasn't just a florist anymore. She was a partner, a woman who was not just loved, but respected for the depth of her soul. Lucas, too, found himself changing. The man who had once only seen value in the trappings of wealth and status now found fulfillment in the work that made a real difference. He no longer needed validation from his high society peers. His validation came from within, from knowing that he was living a life of purpose. Watching the women and children smile, seeing them thrive in the sanctuary he and Aubrey had built together, that was all the success he needed. The love that had blossomed between them in the darkest moments of his life had now flourished into something stronger than he could have ever imagined. They had faced countless challenges, fought through the doubts and fears that threatened to tear them apart, and still they had come out the other side. They had proven that love wasn't about the size of your bank account, the name you wore, or the circle of friends you kept. It was about the heart, the strength of it, the purity of it, and the willingness to fight for the one person who made you feel alive. On a warm afternoon, as the sun bathed the garden in soft golden light, Lucas and Aubrey stood together on the balcony of their estate, overlooking the peaceful sanctuary they had created. The sound of children's laughter echoed in the distance, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. "Aubrey," Lucas said, his voice low but filled with emotion, "this is the life I never knew I wanted. It's simple, but it's everything." Aubrey smiled, her eyes sparkling as she looked at him. "It's perfect, Lucas. It's everything we need." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the quiet beauty of their shared world. Aubrey leaned into him, and for a moment it felt like everything was right, like they had finally found their place, together. Lucas kissed the top of her head gently, his heart swelling with love. "I didn't need money or status. I needed you. This life, this love. This is everything I've ever wanted." Aubrey looked up at him, her hand gently cupping his face. "I love you, Lucas, and I'm proud of the man you've become. Not because of your wealth, but because of your heart." In that moment, surrounded by the peaceful life they had built together, Lucas realized that love, true love, wasn't about the glittering world of luxury and wealth. It was about the bond between two people who saw each other for who they truly were. And that was the kind of love he had with Aubrey, the kind of love that didn't need anything else. Their journey had been filled with twists and turns, with obstacles they never could have anticipated. But here, in this moment, they had found something more precious than anything money could buy. A love that would last a lifetime. They didn't need luxury. They didn't need the world's approval. They only needed each other. And in that simple, perfect truth, they found everything they had ever dreamed of. The air was crisp with the soft whispers of the evening breeze, and the garden was bathed in the warm glow of lanterns swaying gently overhead. It had been months since Lucas and Aubrey had begun their new life together, a life they had built with love, sincerity, and purpose. Now, as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, they stood in the very place where their story had started, ready to make their bond official, not for the world to see, but for their hearts to know. There was no grand ballroom, no over-the-top gowns or flashy decorations. This wedding was different. It was simple, intimate, and real, a reflection of the love that had bloomed in the quiet spaces of their lives, far away from the spotlight. The soft rustling of the wildflowers around them seemed to echo the quiet beauty of their journey together. It was in this sacred space where Aubrey had once met Lucas in his darkest hour that they now stood, surrounded by a handful of people who truly mattered, their closest friends, family, and the children they had helped along the way. Aubrey stood at the end of the aisle, her heart racing, her eyes shining with love. She wore a simple gown, flowing like a dream, with delicate lace and soft fabric that shimmered under the light of the lanterns. It was nothing like the extravagant dresses she had seen in the magazines, nothing like the flashy weddings of the wealthy circles Lucas had once known. But it was perfect, because it was hers, and it was for Lucas. Lucas, standing at the altar, couldn't take his eyes off her. His heart swelled with pride and love, knowing that this moment, this beautiful, quiet moment, was the culmination of everything they had fought for. The million-dollar weddings, the social status, the glitz of high society life. None of it had mattered. What mattered was that he was here, about to marry the woman who had saved him from himself, who had loved him when he had nothing to offer but a broken heart. As Aubrey walked toward him, the soft sound of their closest friends whispering their well wishes, Lucas's chest tightened. She was everything to him. The one who saw beyond the fortune, the one who saw the man he truly was, not the shell the world had created for him. She had given him the gift of peace, of real love, a love that didn't come with strings attached or expectations to fulfill. When she reached the altar, Lucas gently took her hands in his. His blue eyes met hers, filled with a depth of emotion that words could never quite express. In that moment, there was no need for grand speeches. They had already told their story through their actions, through every quiet moment shared, every challenge they had overcome. Lucas smiled, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Aubrey, when we first met, I was lost. I had everything the world could offer, but none of it mattered. You showed me what really matters: love, honesty, and the beauty of being true to yourself. I vow to spend the rest of my life being the man you believed in." the man you made me want to be. You are my heart, my soul, and my forever." Tears welled up in Aubrey's eyes as she squeezed his hands, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "Lucas, when I first saw you, I saw more than just the man who had it all. I saw the man who needed love, who needed someone to see him for who he really was. You've given me more than I ever could have dreamed of. A life of purpose, a life filled with meaning. I vow to love you, to support you, and to stand by your side no matter what comes. You are my heart, my everything." The words were simple, but they were everything. In front of the few people who mattered, in front of the woman who had healed his heart, Lucas knew there was nothing more important than this moment, this vow. The love they shared was not built on wealth, status, or appearances. It was built on understanding, respect, and a deep, abiding connection that had transcended everything. When the vows were exchanged, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, delicate blue flower, the very flower that Aubrey had given him that first day, the one that had marked the beginning of their journey. He held it out to her, his voice a soft whisper. "This flower, it's for you. It's a symbol of the moment you first healed my heart." Aubrey took the flower, her fingers brushing against his as she held it close to her chest. It was a simple gift, but it meant everything. In that small, fragile bloom, she saw the entirety of their love, the way it had blossomed against all odds, the way it had grown stronger each day, each challenge, each triumph. The officiant smiled, nodding to them both. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As Lucas leaned in, their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. A kiss that sealed not just their vows, but the bond they had formed. The crowd erupted into applause, but to Lucas and Aubrey, it felt as though the world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them, standing together in a love that was real, enduring, and everlasting. The night continued with their first dance, under a sky full of stars, in the garden that had witnessed their love from the very beginning. The music played softly, and for that one perfect moment, it was just the two of them. Lucas, the man who had once been lost, and Aubrey, the woman who had found him, who had helped him find his way back to himself. As they danced, their hearts beat as one. The world around them had faded, and in that moment, they had everything they needed: love, happiness, and each other. The future was uncertain, but they knew that as long as they had each other, nothing else mattered. Under the stars in the garden that had witnessed their journey, Lucas and Aubrey shared a dance that would stay with them forever. Their love story, once filled with heartbreak and doubt, had come full circle. And now it was a story of hope, of love over luxury, of two souls who had found their way back to each other. And as the music played on, their love shone brighter than the stars above, a love that would last a lifetime.